All right, friends, welcome back to another, I would say, kind of special Theology and Raw episode. Every now and then I am able or blessed to interview somebody who has meant a lot to me as a person. I don't like the term fan, but yeah, I'm a fan of Josh Garrels. He's one of my favorite musicians, period, and certainly my favorite Christian musician. And his music is just incredible on so many levels, a creativity level, just a sound level, but probably most of all, the content of his songs are just so incredibly powerful. So I really enjoyed this conversation. Got a chance to ask him about the backstory of some of his songs, which you'll be able to listen to later on this episode. And got to know somebody who's been kind of a bit of a hero in my life. I don't know if that's too. Anyway, I was a little starstruck with this one. So I feel like I was kind of awkward, especially at the beginning, and just even looking back, kind of fumbling around on my questions and stuff. So I try to play it cool, try to be like, oh yeah, totally, you're just a normal dude, But in my mind, I'm like, I'm talking to Josh Garrels. I love this conversation. It's still kind of a blur because I was just kind of on a high throughout it. So aside from my awkwardness, I think this is an interesting conversation. So please welcome to the show for the first time, the one and only Josh Garrels. Josh, thanks so much for being a guest on Theology and Raw.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So me and my family, we've been huge Josh Garrels fans for a long, long time. I actually I was speaking at a music festival years ago that you were singing at. You probably don't remember, Audio Feed out in the Midwest. And two of my kids, when they were little, I think my son was he might have been 5. My daughter was maybe 9. And as a speaker, I get backstage access or whatever. But they were sitting on the stage right next to you when you were performing. I don't even think you saw them or whatever, but it was. And even at that age, they were huge Josh Garrels fans. Anyway, that's like a memory that they have that we just literally talked about it again last night. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, lots of fun. Let's for people that maybe don't know who you are, or maybe they know, oh yeah, he's a musician, but maybe they don't know much about your story. Just give us a little basic introduction. Who are you? How'd you get into music? And we'll just go from there.
My name is Josh Garrels. Been making music most of my life. My dad was a music teacher, so music was just always around the house. Music was a common language in my household growing up. Because of that, I never totally aspired to be a career musician. I've been doing this now for upwards of 20 years. Really, I think when things began to take off, so to speak, was when I came into the faith as like a 20-year-old. Up until then, music had always been a part of my life, sort of supplemental to whatever I was into. So all growing up, I was a skateboard kid. So music's definitely part of the scene of skateboarding. It's part of the whole package. And so definitely music outside of the faith was really like an identity piece, sort of part of sculpting your whole persona, your whole identity is music and music culture mixed with, at the time, skateboarding and drug use and counterculture, and that was like my scene, but as those who live life apart from Christ, there was like so much futility in it. You know what I mean? You could be like winning at the scene, which at times I was, like really winning at it, but then so frustrating. And music itself sort of like this weird, vacuous, frustrating thing because it was so intertwined with identity growing up, So coming into faith, I've often said that for me, coming into faith, I didn't come from a religious background as far as church goes. I wasn't like a practicing Jew or Hindu or Muslim, where they have like these sort of strict, very specific, sacred, ritualistic practices to honor their deity. You know what I mean? Yet at the same time, I think the countercultures I came from, music in particular, there's like my coming to salvation was sort of dying to that as religion, and religion being like outward appearances, doing external things to make people think you're greater than you really are, and adhering to these things and judging others on how well they're doing. In many ways, counterculture and music in particular was religious to me. So coming to the faith, interestingly, was a dismantling of that false man, this sort of perfect countercultural entity that I was trying to create to win at the culture that I was interested in. It was actually dying to that man. So in my own way, dying to that law, which is really interesting to think about, but it really was a law to me. And I would judge others in the scene based on how well or not well, if they're posing, you kind of have this whole strict way of judging those around you. And so coming into faith, true faith in the Lord, it was so interesting because all of a sudden, like that mode of dealing with art and creativity was so distasteful to me because there's so much freedom in the Lord. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, people that I never would have hung out with in my pretension become my best friends. You know what I mean? At the time, I'm like 20, 21 years old and hanging out with these like 30, 40-year-old men going to like men's retreats and singing old like Maranatha songs, but like just touched by it. You know what I mean? The freedom of the lack of pretension and unconditional love and the purity of the Lord and his Holy Spirit, to be honest, changed the way I approached music. So even then I wasn't totally planning on music as vocation. I was actually studying visual art, and then dropped out of college to do this internship. It was kind of non-traditional seminary. And I would just stay up at night playing music in my room because it was almost therapeutic. This change had happened inside of me. And just making songs on my bed was therapeutic to me, understanding. I didn't realize at the time, but music for the last 20 years has been my tool to make sense of spirituality, these actual things that are happening with me and this like living God who's come to take his residence in me, like making sense of the reality of following the Lord, So in some ways it was accidental that this ended up becoming, like vocation, calling in a sense, the way I provide for a family. It sprung forth from sort of a purification in the faith of the actual thing. But with that, then it just became this very privatized, like way of dealing with the faith. And then at some point realizing, this actually connects with some people out there, the way that I'm singing about me grappling with the faith, making sense of it, celebrating it, connects with people. And then I had to pay attention to that, and decide, okay, like this is sort of an effective tool I've been given. I would do it anyway, because that's how it's like my own sense of way of journaling. But then making the choice, okay, I'm going to like go public with this, I guess, and then that sort of made a way for me to like vocationally make music for the past like 20 years, So there's sort of a long answer, but that's sort of the gist of how I got to where I'm at with music in particular. My life's a little more dimensional than just music, but that's sort of the story of music in my life,
Yeah. I've been dying to ask you, I mean, this is going to be a two-sided question. Your genre, your sound is, I would say is very unique, especially in the Christian space. And the content of your songs are, I would say, extremely thoughtful, sophisticated, holistic, intellectually in depth. Let me start with that latter point. Like, what do you see your music that way? I mean, your songs, the lyrics are just like extremely thoughtful and very theologically even sophisticated. Would you consider yourself like an intellect, an avid reader? Do you who are some of your intellectual influences that feed into that?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that I'm an avid reader, but I'm an avid like learner, the things that I'm interested in. Strangely enough, I think over the past 3 or 4 years, I'll reach the end of the year and almost be embarrassed, like, dude, I didn't read that many books. But then I realize I've listened to a whole bunch of audiobooks. I think I'm a very auditory learner. And it's been a revelation that, like, oh, like I can ingest a lot more by listening than reading. And I do read, but I wouldn't say that I'm not one of those, we have friends who they just have a stack of books on their nightstand, and they're just like plowing their way through those, and then their whole other list of ones they're getting ready to read. I would say I've got a book that I'm in at any given point. And when that one's done, I'm like open to what's the next book. And then,
so who are some of your influences?
Anyways,
thought influences, whether it's a book you read, listened to, or just some people that you find inspiration from.
Yeah. Sorry, I digressed there. Early on, I came into faith in sort of Calvary Chapel Vineyard-esque church, and became a preaching pastor for a bit. And I would say at that point, like some of Eugene Peterson's books at the time for pastors, Spurgeon, some of the old classics. I tend to gravitate to older guys. I'd say like A.W. Tozer, A.B. Simpson. Recently, for me and my wife, sort of pursuit and understanding like the power of the Holy Spirit is sort of a big deal, So looking at guys like Derek Prince and this guy F.F. Bosworth, who wrote on like healing and some of these subjects that tend to not be touched as much with sort of like certain segments of the church, and those segments that tend to be the ones we think of as like strong theologically or in the gospel, but yet realizing these are part of like the atonement. These are part of what is being offered as the riches in Christ. And he said, it's better for you that I go because I'm going to send the Holy Spirit. And so we need to know, like, what does the Holy Spirit offer for us? And what is Christ offering? So anyway, theologically, those would be some. I don't tend to read tomes of like Kierkegaard and I have, and Barth and all those, I find them interesting, but yet, as I ended your last question, I ended by saying, my life's a bit more dimensional than just music. I would say in general, for me and my wife, Michelle, the pursuit of God, following him, wanting to learn more about him and put it into practice and see the things that are promised and fleshed in our life, and reading biographies of those who have lived heroic lives of the faith. So we read a lot of like missionary biographies in our house, a lot of spiritual biographies. We work through a lot of those in our house with our kids, because those enlighten us and excite us to what's possible in the faith. These are the testimonies of those who follow the Lord, put his promises to the test, and have seen them proven. And so I would say most of every day, I'm not kidding, is us like dialoguing as a family, me and my wife, and praying and thinking through like how we're going about this. What are the truths in the Lord? So we're turning those things over all the time. So naturally, they're like going to work their way into the music. And when you're turning something over and over, and even having some breakthrough of those things being lived out in your own life, then they become personalized. And then your language for them can become a little more personalized. So I would say, in the music, I always hope to say a thing, hopefully not just with a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a clever turn of phrase. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There can be a type of songwriting where, man, you can make a whole career by just locking in on how to have a clever turn of phrase, and I'm talking just huge country hits to pop hits to like Christian worship songs. If you can have that clever turn of phrase that sort of makes a thing fresh or funny or witty, you can build a career on that. You know what I mean? But that, I think, as far as like songs interacting or addressing things of like the living God, I would hope to like couch it in like an honest language, maybe a language that is personalized to me, that makes it more real to others, but is maybe trying to steer clear of just a clever turn of phrase regarding things of the faith. Like just for the sake of being fresh, like, let's figure out a new way to say this. We're not Christians. We're followers of the way of Jesus. And just these like awkward ways of trying to repackage. You know what I mean, man? It can be really kind of silly. But if there can be a way where someone's talking about these things in a fresh language because they've owned it, that's precious. And I think that actually is really effective in culture. So I think with music, because I'm turning these things over, they like things of the Lord, the faith mean a lot to me. You know, it's my life's pursuit. Like those find their way into songs, sometimes in ways that work, maybe sometimes in ways that don't work. So
yeah. Okay, that's super helpful. And yeah, I mean, one of the things I like about your music is that it's not just a bunch of tweetable one-liners or creative, maybe yes, phrases that might be kind of creative, but the depth isn't there. I mean, your songs they tell stories. They dive into a wide range of real aspects of real life. I mean, especially some of your earlier stuff that, I mean, we'll talk about some specific songs in a little bit, but they had almost like a political, I want to say political protest a little bit. I don't know if that's the best phrase. So yeah, I'm thinking like Zion and Babylon, where we'll talk about that one a little bit. The Resistance, even the Revelator, obviously drawn to the Book of Revelation, but Book of Revelation is very political. Is there that side? Like your songs have not a Rage Against the Machine, in your face social kind of, but there's an element of that there. Can you talk about that? I just want to make sure I'm, representing you correctly there, but
yeah, I'd say that still is in me. When I was younger, though, that earlier work, there is a reality as I get older. You realize, even knowing those in their 20s, now late teens, that is a very like idealistic, zealous period of life, and I think I still carry that zealousness. Yet, I mean, at that time with like Zion and Babylon, for instance, me and my wife were this close to like selling everything we owned and jumping on a veggie oil bus with a bunch of Christian anarchists, you know what I mean? Like that's where we were.
Shane Claiborne and Francis Chan. And
yeah, that's where we were like at the time. And there's nothing wrong with someone still choosing to do that with their life right now. There's that sort of like radicalism. But yeah, I think at that time there was more a sense of maybe addressing structures that felt exploitative and at times evil. Especially like Love and War and the Sea in Between, looking at, I mean, when I wrote like The Resistance, so that's like, I was watching all these World War II documentaries at the time and seeing how does a brutal, evil regime come into fruition when it's like, supposedly this like Christian nation of like Germany, you know what I mean? How can the populace say yes to this, And I was like asking those questions, what does it mean to resist these things if they're right in our face? What does it mean to resist something that dominant or popular culture is celebrating? And so I would still ask those questions, that there's a time for us to stand up and say, no, like this is opposed to the things of Christ, But with Love and War and the Sea in Between in particular, there's always for me, there's been this sort of natural dovetailing or parallel, I could say, of, what we see in the world. So take something like a Nazi regime or, some of the stuff we see coming into fruition in our own nation right now,
Right.
When assessing how those things work and the moving parts and components, there's always this parallel to things in the spiritual domain for me. I tend to always kind of like have one foot that's trying to make sense of that. It's almost like the theology and the practice of spirituality. And then I'm looking at the world around me and then saying, these things are similar. These things follow similar patterns and paradigms, So the way of like deception and how like a mafia works or how a regime works, a gang works. These are similar ways to how like the spiritual realm, the enemy, Satan, the demonic, these are the same ways they work to entice you to come in. And then once you're in, the door closes behind you and they say, the only way you're leaving is if you die. You know what I mean? And we're ultimately out to destroy you, that it's like the same in both those arenas, the spiritual and like an evil structure. So I think for me, it's always interesting to see the parallels between men and systems that are really following selfishness and really the God of this world, and how similar it becomes a copy of how the demonic works. Just as in an ideal world, the church and the believer should be a picture of what heaven looks like, a picture of what flourishing and prospering and healing in the faith looks and smells and feels like. We'll call it the kingdom. It should look like the kingdom. Anyway, so I think songs like that are like, they've always been me looking at the world around me and comparing it to what I see shown to us in the scripture as the realities of the spiritual domain, of which it says we're locked in combat, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. I mean, and those themes, I mean, outside of like Christian hip hop, I don't see them very much in Christian, broadly speaking, Christian music. And that's why I ask. And I actually, that kind of feeds into the other flip side of the uniqueness I see in your music, just the sound, the genre. You do have, I mean, some hip hop influences. Do you have, like, if when you're listed, are you listed under any kind of specific genre, like indie something? I mean, because you span so many different genres, I don't know how to categorize you.
Every time I upload a song for the internet, you have to like choose what's your dominant genre, what's your subgenre, what's genre number 2, what subgenre. Like you have to fill out this whole thing. And so I mean, I've for years I've just been like I'm like singer songwriter,
okay.
That's what makes the most sense to me. It wouldn't make sense for me to just go under like hip hop, because that's like one small percentage of what I do. But I mean, I did grow up, like I said, skateboarding and just kind of listening to nothing but East Coast hip hop through high school into college. So especially that earlier work, it was still very much just hip hop. The delivery, the like vibe was in me,
Like, so like Beastie Boys, like that, or give me what's an example?
Yeah, I mean, Beastie Boys. I liked Beastie Boys. I mean, like Check Your Head and Ill Communication were great albums, and that was in the period where I was listening to a lot of hip hop. But the hip hop of the time, that would have been almost a little more mainstream, even though I liked it.
Okay.
But yeah, back then, I mean, like Wu-Tang, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, sort of East Coast, a lot of the hip hop that was based in sampling and a lot of like jazz sampling, East Coast predominantly. I never really got in at that period. I wasn't really into West Coast, which for me felt more like Tupac and this other stuff, although I've come to find out there's great hip hop out of the West Coast in that era. I think I was just more unfamiliar with it. For me, it was really like East Coast sort of skateboarding, vibey, like jazz based hip hop, Diggable Planets, stuff like that.
So what did you make I mean, I don't know how, I'm not musical at all. I love music. My family loves music. I'm not personally musical at all. So I don't really understand the underneath, what goes on behind the scenes. Like, did you make a concerted effort to say, I'm not going to be locked into one genre box, or is it just you didn't think about it, you just started producing stuff you like? Or because that doesn't seem typical, right, for somebody to really write music that just spans kind of several genres. It was, I think, in short, it was just making the music that I felt like I wanted to make. But even hearkening back to your first question again, talking about coming into the faith and being broken free of very, very, very strict adherence to musical genre. I mean, for a whole period, I just listened to punk rock and that was it. Like all of the music sucks, just like skate punk. And then I like started doing drugs and like listening to hip hop. And then it was like hip hop. That's like all there is. That's all I listen to. And for years, that's all I listened to. So talk about being just so strict to the, like whatever genre I was into. That was it. That's like, that's the world to me. That's everything
that's important to me is in this musical genre, So then again, coming to faith and sort of being like broken free from that, and the adherence to trying to, to like the specific genre or art form, it really was a delight to just be like, oh man, we can like play with it all, like, because I've always really enjoyed folk music and classic rock and hip hop and world music and punk rock and like old electronic music like Aphex Twin. And my sisters, I have two older sisters who listen to music really, 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 really broadly when I was growing up. And they would give me mixtapes for my birthday and Christmas every year. And they have all this crazy indie rock and like eccentric, like underground, deep crate digging songs. And so I like grew up listening to those too. And so to be in the faith and realize like there's no boundaries here, And I don't, about what I'm about to say, I'm old enough that I don't say this in like a snarky, snobby way anymore. But I like, when I came into the faith, just because of the genres and the taste that I'd come from, I didn't immediately connect with music in like the Christian sphere. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it may have even been snobby back then. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
sure. A little bit. It's not so much now at all. You know what I mean? But I will say, like, we're drawn to things. You listen to something, you see something, you're like, I like it. Or you see it and you're like, I don't really like it. It's like a human thing, So there wasn't a ton that was like at that point inspiring. There were some things, that was right when like Waterdeep put out that like folky album, and I remember really loving that. And I would go to Cornerstone back in the day, and that was like a real sign of life for me, just because like underground music and obscure stuff was so, even as a believer, was interesting to me. Like, oh man, they're trying stuff. You know what I mean? They're going for it, even if it's in this wild direction. But there was in all of that, I think, a freedom and just like, we could go any direction with this, man. You know what I mean? Like I was conscious that I'm a Christian now, and all of the music scenes I came from, I'm anathema to all of that now. If I'm going to make music to the Lord, like I'm not trying to be accepted in some hip hop or punk scene. Like, like Christian music is just like anathema to like mainstream culture. At least it was back then. You know what I mean? So I was like, if I'm going to make music to the Lord, like, what do I got to lose here, man? You know what I mean? Like make the stuff I like want to make, things that I think sound good. And I didn't totally anticipate that other people would like that, but I think there were things I wanted to hear in some ways. I was like, I don't think there's anything out here that is addressing like this sound or this sound. And so I just was like tinkering and tampering and sampling, and you know what I mean? Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question. I tend to talk around in circles till I find my answer, man.
You're a true artist, man. You're a true artist. My follow-up question is that it's a kind of two-sided question. Is that risky for a musician to sort of break the rules on you need to be this genre or this genre, do this? Like, was that risky? Like, and did you care? Like, then and even now, like, do you ever create music thinking, man, I really want to make sure my audience appreciates this? Or do you just say, I like this. If people love it, that's great. If not, I'm going to let the chips fall where they may. One of my favorite bands of all time is Rush. And they were very much on, we're going to produce stuff that we are interested in. And if it lands, it lands. If not, we don't care. And sometimes it landed, sometimes it didn't. And they just produced it. I feel the same vibe in you, but I don't know.
Yeah. I guess it could be risky. I think especially be risky if someone's doing that just for the sake of doing that. Like, I want to be this artist that just doesn't care and does stuff all over you know what I mean?
Plays out of key on purpose.
Yeah. But when I think back, I know that from the very beginning, I started making these albums. At first, I mean, literally, I just recorded myself on an 8-track, and I would mixed it and would burn my own CDs and sell them out of the trunk of my car. And it caught on that way. And the music was all the way from the beginning. It was like experimental. And so I think I have sort of cultivated the freedom with my listening base that part of what's to be expected is that I would try things. And I'm glad that I sort of have that freedom allowed to me, and I think because of that, some things land better than others. There's some things that are more sort of popular with a larger amount of people, but then I put out like a really low key folk worship album in the beginning days of COVID. And some OG fans are like, I don't know, man. It's like pretty quiet, pretty subtle. But then there's other people that are like, this is my favorite thing you've ever done. This is so calming. And I love this. More of this, please. But then, so you'll have people all over the spectrum. A lot of people would like me to go back to just making like beat driven hip hop-esque music, but I'll make whatever is like true to who I am at the time, For I think not to do that is actually disingenuous and a little dishonest. So I am pretty sensitive to that, where if I sense that I'm like recycling a sound that I'm not really vibing with or really excited about, underneath that, if I start picking at that, I'll be like, oh, I'm really like trying to capture some magic I had 10 years ago. I'm trying to everyone really liked it when I did that. Let's try that again. You know what I mean? And whether people know it or not, whether or not the artist even knows it or not, that can be a little disingenuous. It's like trying to capture the glory you had. If that's coming from like a true place where like, oh, these sounds I was excited about, they've like come back to me. I'm excited about this again. I'm going to work with some beats and man, this is fun, But if there's like deep down a primary motivation of like, I'm going to like try to beef up those numbers again. I'm going to this album I did was really popular. I'm going to do something really similar to that. And, man, I think you can feel it when that happens with people. And that's not just in music. That's in anything that works in your life. You know what I mean? Assessing motivation, in the end, I really love music and I'm really sort of jealous for the sound itself. And so I try to be honest with myself. I don't know if I always am. I try to be honest with myself, though, in assessing my motivation within a particular song of like, what am I trying to do here? Am I I feel like really trying to impress here? Am I really trying to harken back to like quintessential signature Josh Garrels here so I can get the core fans to be like, oh, there it is. You know what I mean? If I'm not actually feeling it, I really just want to make like quiet finger-picked worship songs. That's where my heart's actually at. I probably should do the quiet finger-picked songs if that's what's actually in me and trust that that'll find the audience. And perhaps something will come around that, OG fans over here will like sometime, but I don't want to force that. I'm pretty sensitive to not trying to like force that. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Have you listened to the latest, the Pearl Jam album? I feel like they went back to some of their, it feels like some of their original stuff. And I don't know, as you're talking, I was like, I don't know if that was intentional, if they're trying to redeem the past. I loved it because I love the old stuff. And I thought, man, this sounds like, I mean, I think we're roughly the same age. I'm 48. I'm
43.
43. Yep. Okay. You're okay. So like, I just think early mid 1990s is like the, the best, rock music in my opinion. I mean, 80s of course too, but so I mean, Pearl Jam obviously led the way in that. And I just don't see that kind of old sound revived again. But you make a good point. Like if it depends on how and why you're trying to do it. If you're trying to capitalize on earlier success when that was part of your journey, but doesn't need to be, there could be some bad motivations for trying to redeem that. I'm a writer. It's the same temptation. You can have one book that really kind of takes off or whatever, and then you try to write another book and you try to mimic that, and it just typically doesn't go well especially when you're just trying to play into the masses or success or something. It's like when movies, right? When they come out, part one or the first one is a success, and then they try to do the same thing. It just doesn't.
Yeah, dude. And some of those franchises, like some musicians, I mean, like Friday the 13th, 17, they can literally like ride on the success or the fumes from like one good movie. Halloween, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm picking on horror movies, but you can like ride into the sunset on the fumes of a thing that worked in our culture. You know what I mean? And so for anyone, any creative, anyone in a ministry or a writer, like I think testing it, where we're at, and even our love for the thing itself, am I just riding the fumes into the sunset? The numbers are there that can qualify me to continue doing this, but is it effective? And I think that's a question I ask a lot. Like, is this effective? The numbers are there that I could just ride this, but like, is this what I'm called to do right now? And if so, like, what is actually in me? And that can be the hard work, I think, of like a career artist or writer, is having to really be honest with like, okay, is this what I'm made to do at this point in my life? And if the answer then is yes, like really doing the hard work with your own story, being a student of your own story and asking like, well, what's God doing? What's in me? And that may take years to just answer that question. Wow, and you could get impatient and bypass that and say, I'll just make another one like the last one. You know what I mean? When perhaps like, what if some of our greatest work is actually in these like 10, 20 years into the craft, and the biggest temptation is to churn out content, especially in this day and age, churn that out. You know what I mean? Like, stay, you got to keep it in front of people. You got to put something out, I just ask questions a lot. Like, what if the Lord was calling you to himself for like 2 or 3 years? And it was like hard financially because the same money's not coming in, but he's taking you back to class to show something new to you. And then you emerge and you actually have something to say. And then like you could have put out 3 books in those 3 years and plateaued. You could have kept what you had, but maybe not really added anything to the influx of content. But you were able to pay your mortgage, you're able to keep your quality of life. That's a temptation when you have a wife and kids and a mortgage. You know what I mean? What if he's calling you away to tell you something? And that process isn't just, I took a 2-week retreat and bam, my next book is here, my next album's here. What if it's like a few years of process to understand what he's doing in you, or like what he's saying, and then you hit it, and then that's like a work that actually means something, that is refreshing and a benefit, a service to those around you. I just tend to think that might be a reality, but it's scary, So like I said, if you have a wife and kids and a mortgage and a track record and a batting average, and you just sort of pull out,
That's good, man. So is this, if I remember correctly, did you have a pretty long gap between an album, I think in 2015 and 2020? Was there a period of time when you didn't release, or maybe I just missed it?
No, you might just be remembering when I first moved here. I'm sitting in our like guest house here at our farm in Michigan. We moved. Okay. Yeah, we moved here like in the middle of the pandemic.
Okay.
Back to nature, back to the country, And I like took a sabbatical right then too. We moved into this house. I turned 40 and I took a year sabbatical. And part of that sabbatical, honestly, was me holding him at music, open-handed for the first time in my adult life. Cause I mean, music's been good to me, man. Like I said, I didn't aspire to this, but once I committed myself to it, I've worked hard, I've worked hard and like put out, a lot of albums, and it's provided liberally for me. And I have 5 kids. And so, I mean, when you just talk about like, income and influence, and music has provided those things. And I think I've been in this period, starting with the sabbatical, of holding it open-handedly and saying, like, Lord, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Gosh, what are we doing? What are we doing here? Like, I'm willing to let go of this if you're asking me to,
Wow.
So for the first time, kind of at least being willing to hold it open-handedly. And I'd say even since then, it's been this dialogue with me and him about like the place of music in my life. It's still in my life. I'm making an album right now. Just finished a soundtrack and for these other guys. And it's still part of what I do, yet it's changing. as I allow him to come in and assess it and lead me in it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So all that to say, you may have been thinking about that. I've definitely in this period also like pulled back. I just sort of downgraded with like traveling and touring and online social media. I very rarely interact with social media these days, just based on years of having to interpret, why do I not like how I feel when I do that? Why do I feel anxious? And like, this is most of the time sort of a distraction and messes my day up. You know what I mean? So having to make sense of just a long track record of, I don't love how this feel, like what it does to me, you know? Anyway, I've been quieter. I've been quieter for several years, but that's a bit of why I think like, sabbatical and sort of, figuring out what is it at this point in my life, you know, what are we doing with this, Lord, you know?
What's the greatest challenge at being a professional musician? Is it touring, being away from your family? Is it the financial? You know, I'm sure sometimes finances may have been stressful or whatever, but yeah, for you as a Christian artist, what's the greatest challenge?
One, I would say it's probably different for a lot of artists, you know, depending on temperament, it would be different for a lot of people. The challenge, that is. The greatest challenge. Yeah, I think for me, I would say would be like maintaining the purity of the thing itself. Because as I said just a moment ago, when you start entangling vocation mixed with your passion and the thing you love to do, mixed with, you know, if you're a believer, like some sense of calling on your life. So you have this interaction with God and the thing you're doing, this interaction with yourself and your own passion, and then this interaction with like industry and income, figuring out how those interact while keeping the thing itself, you know, so in this case, making music and my interaction, keeping it like pure, as best as I can, not letting it get too like entangled in, oh man. I mean, I would say like carnality, you know, in the sense of, in the worst case scenario, you are building this little kingdom. I mean, people know my music by my name, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm like very, very lowercase, small, famous or whatever. Every once in a while in an airport, someone will be like, point at me and they'll say my full name, Josh Garrels, you know, like, yeah, hey, how you doing? You know? But when you're building like this industry and this business around your name and around offering something that's like really vulnerable and it's the best work you could possibly create creatively. So then there's all your own attachment to it, your identity attachment to it. Because, oh my gosh, this is like, this is me and this is my thoughts and my heart out on my sleeve here. And then people connect with it, which is the blessing and what you hope for. But then that connection equals sold out shows because more people are connecting. You know what I mean? So it gets real sticky, man. You know what I mean? So I would say, I don't know how much deeper to get into it beyond just, I've had to put certain governors on my career when I realized like, oh, when I do too much of this, just like social media, this feels not good. So like when social media becomes self-promotion, that doesn't feel right. And I think for a reason, the Lord says, let another praise you, not your own lips. He says, you know, when you show up somewhere, take the lowest seat and get called up. Don't assume you're at the highest seat. He like means those things, you know? So when we transgress those, your heart will be like, ooh, like it boosted the numbers, but that felt gross, you know? So having to like make those real-time decisions of like, gosh, I know this is best practice. I know this is industry standard, but when I'm honest, I don't think this is right, you know?
I think
or being on the road too much. Yeah. I would say being on the road too much. Like when I used to tour a little more heavily, I remember this one tour, man, this one tour I was on, it was like 2 or 3 shows too many. And by those last 2 or 3 shows, I was wore out, man. I was wore out. I was peopled out. I'm an introvert, you know, so I can't. After a show, usually is when I'm like really excited. The show's done. I'm full of adrenaline and I'll connect with people. That's like the best time for me to connect with people. But after the show, those final 2 or 3 shows, I was sort of a zombie, but I'd committed to like being out there and talking to however many 100 people wanted to sit and wait and talk and sign this. Can I take a picture? And I felt this thing in my heart well up that was almost angry with people. And starting to be jaded and starting to like try to cut conversations off. And I was like, whoa. Like, hey, buddy, like that's not healthy. You know, that's not healthy for you or these people. Like, so I would say, yeah, like, again, a long answer to your question, but having to in real time realize, oh, this is happening right now. This isn't good. And what do you do when you come to those realizations? You have to go one way or the other, you know? So for me, it was like, I'm going to tour less and I'm not going to do tours that are that long ever again, you know?
Really? What's a healthy tour look like for you? I mean, is it, you're gone like a week out of every month or?
Yeah. Like I do what I call dad touring, man. It's like 3 or 4 days, fly out, do 3 or 4 shows, come home. And then, nothing for like another month at least.
Okay.
So
have you ever been you ever come out to Boise, Idaho, where I'm at? I don't think you've ever.
I've never been to Boise. No, I don't think I've ever done a show in Idaho that I can remember. Yeah.
I got to get you out here, man. All right. I want to ask you about a few songs. And so this first song is not only my favorite song of yours, it's one of my top 5 favorite songs of all time. It's on my running playlist. It's on my workout playlist. It's something I just listen to constantly. It's one of the few songs I've gone through and tried to memorize the lyric. I'm not a lyricist. Like I have several U2 songs that are my favorite. I still couldn't actually tell you the exact lyrics. This one I've worked through pretty extensively. So this comes from Lost Animals, your Lost Animals album, and it's the song All Creatures.
Centipede to witness the complexity of 100 legs that were moving unexpectedly, ironically, just as they were meant to be. They're fearfully and wonderfully made. An organism prays in circadian rhythms. Sun will rise and then the sun will set.
What inspired this song? I think it's a unique song in the history of songs in general, but just the theology of creation mixed with, I just think the sound is just off the chart. But yeah, take us back in time.
Yeah, I haven't thought through that song in a long time. I know that I
caught you off guard on that.
I know that I sampled, I think it was the Salters at the time. Again, they were sort of like anarchist Christian gutter punk. And they were like, yeah, you could sample our song. So I like that accordion in the beginning is me like sampling their work and then, layering these big beats on top of it. Yeah. But the line that immediately comes to me in that song is like the one about being sort of like an armchair warrior, or like a plant that's in a pot in a house, and sort of like comparing those two to each other, like both meant to be wild and rooted in the reason they were created, And so, like you said, it sounds like you've connected in particular to the songs that have some elements of like manhood or warfare, which I think many of us feel deep down in our hearts that we're called into an epic storyline, which is something I do still feel very strongly about. I know a lot of people say this, but, I'm of the opinion that we live in an epic that is like rivals Lord of the Rings. I think if we could see what was happening around us and what's at stake, it would be so eye-opening. We would all live our lives much differently. If we really, really internalized, or it was revealed to us what's at stake in our own lives and our families' lives, in the world and the time we live in, our jaws would drop, And so I think I've always had that internal sense that I think a lot more is happening here than we realize. And I think we actually are we're called into a war. Like when you're born again, whether you like it or not, you're born into a war. And all of a sudden, your eyes were blinded before by the God of this world, which is what Scripture says. Satan has blinded the eyes of those who don't know the Lord. And when you come into faith, there's a reason we say, I was blind, but now I see. All of a sudden, your eyes are open to the reality of God. But that also means that you're placed squarely in the Lord's camp, in his army, which also means that you're a target, which means you're in a battle. You were born into warfare. And so I think that song, like the others that you've mentioned that I think you resonate with, would be ones of me really grappling with, man, we're in a battle here. And if I can create anthems to excite people to realize that, that's a good thing. That can be a sobering, eye-opening thing to reorient ourselves today, because I'm fickle. I forget. If I can reorient myself today, they're like, okay, today is more than me just taking care of my punch list of details I got to do. Like today is the day the Lord has made. And like, all right, open my eyes. What's going on around me? Yeah.
Well, lots of that song, it just alerts you to how God permeates all of creation, and even in the, you mix in just, about like a theology of creation, but just kind of seemingly mundane parts of life and sort of redeeming those and saying, no, all of life is meaningful. At least that's kind of how my heart responds to it. I know we've already talked about it, but I would love to hear the heart that went behind this next one. So this comes from your Jacaranda, is that how you say it? Jacaranda album, and it's Zion and Babylon.
Great mammoth, form and function, careless consumerist consumption, dangerous dysfunction, disguised as expensive taste. Down but people disgraced by what I claim I need and what I want to waste. I take no account for nothing if it's not mine. Misappropriation of funds, protect my 90% with my guns. Whose side am I on? Well, who's winning? Kingdom built with the blood of slaves, orphans, widows, and homeless graves. I sold their souls just to build my private mansion. Some people say that my time is coming. Kingdom come as the justice running down, down, down on me. I'm a poor child, I'm a lost son. I refuse to give my...
Yeah, what's the story behind this one?
Yeah, Zion and Babylon. Again, like a compare and contrast of really, again, two rival systems, two rival kingdoms. Scripturally, Babylon being this picture of the systems of men, the systems of this world. When Babylon the Great falls in Revelation, there's this whole list of all the things that were traded and bought and sold. And at the very end of that long, long list, it says, and the bodies and souls of men. At the very bottom of this list of all these things that were bought and sold, meaning that system is built upon the backs of people exploited and trafficked and Yeah. It's upside down in the sense compared to then Zion, which is this picture of the Lord's system, the Lord's kingdom,
Well, the second verse, it says, it's a misappropriation of funds. Protect my 99% with my guns. Whose side am I on? Well, who's winning? My kingdom's built with the blood of slaves, orphans, widows, and homeless graves. I sold their souls just to build my private mansion. Just that tension we live in. We live in this most successful, luxurious nation, and a lot of times we celebrate that. Or even we have the most powerful military in the history of any nation, but then like how that gets intertwined with our faith can be really destructive, and I just, in this song, I just feel you like digging in and trying to separate these systems that have become merged together, where there really is a lot more opposition between Zion and Babylon than congruence. And yet we live in a daily battle of fighting that congruence that just wants to seep into our bones, and you're just pulling those apart. And I would imagine some people might have even been offended at this song. That's what I like about it so much. I mean, again, this has just that protest kind of feel to it, not in the protest for protest's sake, punk rock, I'm just going to be different. And when someone says, go this way, I'm going to go the opposite. But true, like, again, theologically rich, upside down kingdom kind of protest. And so I so resonate with it, man. It's so good.
Right on. That was the first song, actually. Zion Babylon was the first song where I like changed my delivery from more of like a hip hop delivery into sort of, I remember even at the time I like watched some documentary on Woody Guthrie, and his guitar. He would go around singing these like freedom anthems with this acoustic guitar that said, "This machine kills fascists." He would write on his acoustic guitar. And like, even old Bob Dylan, like Masters of War and stuff, where they're just kind of almost in a hip hop manner, compacting a lot of words and a lot of thoughts into kind of just a simple chord structure that keeps repeating, which is sort of like hip hop, you know what I mean? And it's interesting, Zion Babylon, that was the first one where I was like, I'm going to like do this one different. I'm not going to, essentially, there's going to be a lot of words in this song, but I'm not going to, it's not going to be like a hip hop delivery. It's almost going to be like a Woody Guthrie delivery, And that was sort of the child then of like Farther Along, At the Table. Those are all ones that have sort of followed the evolution of that type of delivery, which is almost more of a hybridized, like it's connected to hip hop, but it's not, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, At the Table was the next one. So this comes from your album Home, which is a little more recent. When did Home come out?
It was 2015. So we're looking at 9 years, man.
Oh, still 9 years. Golly.
I lost some nameless things. My innocence flew away from me. Shit, had to hide a face from my desire to embrace forbidden fire. But at night I dream she's singing over me. Oh, my child, come on home. Home to me, and I will hold you in my arms, and joyfully there will always be a place for you at my table. Return to me.
Yeah. What's the story behind at the Table? This, rather than me explain it, I'd rather have you explain it.
Yeah. In broad strokes, it's sort of the prodigal son and elder son, the first stanza or the first verse, is probably more like the prodigal son, saying, I went the way of wayward winds, you're following him, realizing that he's abandoned something and he longs to go back. It would be that moment where, the son says, I believe I'll turn around and go back home and see if I can at least eat the pods or whatever. No, he's eating the pods. And he says, if I go back home, I'll be treated better by my father, Yeah. But then, the second verse being a committal, to like, I'm going to live into my purpose now, like I'm going to put my hand to the plow and I'm going to keep moving forward until I get to the Father's home. You know what I mean? So one's a welcoming back to a prodigal. The other one is like sort of looking at the one who's, I wouldn't say like the elder brother, but like the person who's just dedicated themselves to like sort of that long obedience in the same direction with a sense of there'll be a time when I'll be welcomed in, when all this work will be worth it. I know I can't look back. I have nowhere else to go. I have to keep moving forward. And I'd say that might be, or you're more mature Christian who like, I was the prodigal son at one point, but I've also now been a believer for 24 years. So I can relate more to the one who has like their hand on the plow and they're like, dude, this is harder than I thought it was going to be, but I'm going to keep pushing forward, Yeah.
Your latest one, this will be the last one we'll talk about. Your single just released, I think, a couple months ago, The Watchman.
Yeah.
We were just listening to this last night with my family, and it really spoke to us. Like we've, like any family, ups and downs. We've had some tough few years for various reasons, and just that theme of the morning. I forget the exactly. I forgot to write down the lyrics, but anticipating. I mean, I'm sure, is it inspired by Ezekiel 3 of that parable, the watchman standing at the city gate and looking, and here almost anticipating that light will come. It might not feel like it now, but there is hope in the Lord.
If I'm fully honest, waiting on your promise, even through the trauma, swept my friends away. The darkness is upon us, the death of saints and psalmists, but I will sing my song for you anyway. 'Cause you're all I have, Lord. You are the way, and I'll always love you, and I will wait like a watchman at the gate, waiting for morning to break. I can feel the winds changing, getting further down.
What inspired this song?
Yeah, I mean, definitely what we see happening over the past 3 or 4 years. I think the numbers are coming in, the studies of how many people are not only like abandoning church, but abandoning the faith.
Yeah.
And these are, for most of us, because the numbers are so high, if we sat and thought, we could make a little list of those that we've walked with over the past 5, 10, 15 years of those that have now walked away. I've got a pretty lengthy list, and some of these are people that we shared those zealous, idealistic 20-something years living in community and, trying to live out the book of Acts together. And, like these are people that I ran pretty deep with, but, I talked with my friend John Eldridge, interviewed me about this song too. And we were both realizing like this trend, though, it's not like new to the pandemic and, everything that's happened politically and the shift in so many structures and economies. It's not the last 4 or 5 years. For me, I mean, it goes all the way back to like 2010, 2011, when I was writing Love and War in the Scene Between, which was me writing songs like Slip Away and others and The Resistance. Even back then, maybe the intuitive part of me, or maybe even like if there's a prophetic thing that I don't even realize is there sometimes, but even then realizing like, whoa, something's happening right now. Like something's changing. Was I looked at the body around me, and I looked at, even back then, people I started to feel like there was this falling away. And back then I just attributed it to like, well, we're in our early 30s. So we're seeing the first wave of our friends get divorced and walk away from the faith. You know, this must just be what happens at this time. You know, like there's some casualties. Like that made me and my wife do some self-assessment. Okay, like where are we weak that we could be given to these things? You know what I mean? So like in many ways we chose to strengthen ourselves in the Lord in that time when we saw those things happening all the way back in 2010, you know, but the trend never stopped. It's just sort of every year there's more people sort of added to the list. While in our life, not a lot of people being added to the list of like, whoa, but look what they're doing. Like they're going hard after the Lord. Whoa, look at the story in that person's life. You know what I mean? Like those stories are fewer and far between at this point, at least in our circles for whatever reason, you know? So Watchman, yeah, definitely coming from that place of seeing the traumas and everything that have like kind of pulled my friends away from the moorings, broken them free from their anchor, you know, coming to terms with that while realizing like if any of us are going to make it, we got to keep our lamps full of fuel. We got to like keep our eyes open. We need to stay awake as we're commanded to stay awake and look for his coming, you know? Yeah, like a lot depends on this, you know, but in the picture of that watchman, I think it's in Ezekiel or it might be somewhere else in scripture where the Lord actually holds the watchman accountable to whether or not he was awake. Cause like the lives of everyone inside the city depend on that person staying awake. So realizing if there are some of us that are awake, if we think we're awake, you know, I think some people think they are and they might not be, but like if we are really awake to what the Lord's doing in this time, it's like we'll be held accountable to what we do with that information. If we just hunker down and close our mouths and thank God that our family's not going to pot like the rest of the world out there or something like that, like you may actually be held accountable for not taking what he showed you and blowing the trumpet and calling people to him. You know what I mean? Anyway, there's some thoughts on that. Yep.
Is that part of, is that a standalone single or is it a pre-release of a future album? Or
you know, man, I have a whole album. It's part of a whole album. I've got a 12-song album that I've kind of gone back to basics. I've been producing and mixing these songs on my own, making my own album art, and it just takes a lot longer. I sort of, in some ways, it's like going back to school. I'm like learning to really mix for the first time. So I like mixed that one myself. And so because of that, I think these songs are taking longer. They'll probably just leak out one by one as I finish them rather than, I don't know. It feels right this time around to just address each song as its own little thing and then put it out there, you know. But there are 12 songs, so that means there's like 10 more that are waiting to be released, you know, as I finish them.
Well, Josh, thanks so much for being on Theology Raw. So enjoyed the conversation. People can look up, they can just Google your name on Spotify, their favorite music app. How about any upcoming tour dates in the near future this summer? Or?
I got nothing this summer, man. I got some things potentially in the books, but yeah, I've like I said, I'm not traveling much right now. Yeah.
That's why I get it. I'm a father of 4 and I travel for a living and that's tough, but it's sad for us fans who would love to see you more, but I'm glad you're making wise decisions along those lines. But thanks so much, man. Really appreciate you. Love your music and I love your heart behind everything you're doing. So really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Preston. It's good to be here.
I was born into a system constructed for failure. It's a sinking ship being manned by drunken sailors. An escape artist behind the bars of a jailer. An asthmatic attack and they withhold the inhaler. If a shoe doesn't fit, what good is a tailor? In the midst of this crisis, please cancel the gala. Without a symphony, there's no...
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.